Alright, this is going to be one of those videos where by the end you're going to be like, man, I feel like I should have paid more attention to when this was actually happening.
You suck, you jackass!
Howdy, and thanks for clicking on this video to see what this jackass has to say. I appreciate ya. Today we're talking about Chris Farley and specifically how Hollywood took one of the funniest human beings to ever exist and basically said, hey, you know what would be great? If we squeezed every last drop of comedy out of this dude until he literally dies. And then we'll release his final movies after he's dead to make a few more bucks. Yeah, it's gonna be one of those videos. Let's get depressed together. Our story starts in 1990 when Chris Farley gets hired on Saturday Night Live alongside this little-known comedian named Chris Rock. And right from the jump, Farley's different. Most comedians on SNL, they're trying to be clever, they're trying to be witty, they're trying to show off just how smart they are. Chris Farley, though, this motherfucker just threw himself downstairs for laughs. And you know what? It worked. Holy shit, did it work. The guy created characters like Matt Foley, the motivational speaker who lives in a van down by the river. And he'd literally crash through tables during the sketch, not because the script called for it, but because Chris Farley thought it would be funnier. Think about that for a second. The dude was so committed to getting a laugh that he would just destroy furniture on live TV. And NBC was like, yeah, this is fine, let's keep doing this. So Farley quickly became part of what people called the bad boys of SNL. Him, Adam Sandler, David Spade, Chris Rock, Rob Schneider. These guys were just having the time of their lives making weird, stupid comedy that somehow connected with millions of people. But here's where things start to get a little weird. Even back then, people noticed that Chris was different. Bob Odenkirk, Saul himself, who was a writer on the show, said that Lorne Michaels would literally ban Farley from SNL for weeks at a time when he was too fucked up to perform. Weeks at a time. Can you imagine? You're on the biggest comedy show in America, it's your dream job, and your boss has to keep kicking you out because you can't stop getting wasted. That's not party too hard on the weekend behavior, that's I have a serious problem behavior. But did anyone in Hollywood think, hey, maybe we should get this guy some real help instead of just banning him and hoping he figures it out? Of course not. They just kept using him until he broke. So after 5 years on SNL, Chris and most of his buddies get fired following the 1994-95 season. And you know what? At first, this looked like the best thing that ever happened to him and his career. He immediately goes on to star in Tommy Boy with David Spade, and that movie makes $32 million. Then he does the eerily similar Black Sheep, also with Spade, and that makes another $32 million.
Whitey!
These aren't just successful movies, these are legitimate hits that prove Chris Farley can carry a film all on his own. But here's the problem. Hollywood looked at those two movies and didn't see Chris Farley is a talented actor who can do physical comedy. They saw fat guy falls down equals money. So what do? They give him Beverly Hills Ninja, a movie where the entire joke is what if a fat white guy was a ninja? And Chris hated it, like genuinely hated it. According to his friends, after that first screening, Chris went to the bathroom and cried on his manager's shoulder because he was so embarrassed by how bad this movie was. Which can actually just break your heart. This is a guy whose entire career was built on physical comedy, on not being afraid to look ridiculous. And he was crying because how ashamed he was of his own movie. That should have been a massive red flag that maybe, just maybe, Hollywood was pushing him in the wrong direction. But did they listen? Ha! Of course not. The final SNL appearance, watching a man die on stage. October 25th, 1997, Chris Farley returns to host Saturday Night Live just 2 months before he died. And honestly, it was horrifying to watch. Now, I'm not exaggerating here. SNL writer Al Franken literally called parts of the episode disturbing. Chris was out of breath, covered in sweat, visibly struggling to get through the sketches. He blew out his voice during dress rehearsal and spent the live show sounding like he'd been gargling gravel. But here's the really fucked up part. They knew he was in bad shape. Lorne Michaels was so worried about Chris that he secretly brought Chris Rock to the studio as a backup plan in case Farley couldn't make it through the show. They had contingency plans for their host literally collapsing on stage, and they still put him on television. The episode is missing 4 full sketches from the official version you can watch online now, and they're all the ones that focus specifically on Farley. Because even SNL realized after the fact that maybe broadcasting a man's mental breakdown wasn't the best television. In the moment, they just kept cameras rolling and let America watch Chris Farley slowly kill himself for laughs. One more time for the people in the back. They knew he was dying, they had backup plans ready, and they still put him on stage because the show must go on. Almost Heroes: How to Destroy a Movie and a Man. While Chris was struggling through his final SNL appearance, Hollywood was getting ready to release his last leading role, Almost Heroes, a Western comedy directed by the great Christopher Guest. Now, Christopher Guest, the dude known for writing This Is Spinal Tap and directing Best in Show and Waiting for Guffman. The dude knows comedy. Matthew Perry was coming off Friends at the height of his popularity, so this movie really should have been a slam dunk. Instead, it became the perfect example of how Hollywood can take everything good about a project and just shit all over it. First, the studio kept interfering with Guest's vision. They wanted more of Farley's fat guy falls down shtick instead of letting him actually act. They turned what could have been a smart, funny period comedy into another Chris Farley hurts himself for 90 minutes movie. But here's the really fucked up part. They filmed this in 1996, over a year before it was released. Chris Farley died in December 1997, and the movie didn't come out until May 1998. So for 6 months, this studio sat on a dead man's final performance, probably doing focus groups and re-edits while his friends and family were still grieving. And when it finally came out, it was terrible, god-awful. Not because Chris was bad, he was never bad, but because nobody gave a shit about making it good. One reviewer said the plot isn't merely stupid, but heartless. Viewers aren't given a single reason to watch beyond the anticipation of seeing Farley fall off more scenery. They literally turned Chris Farley's last starring role into a movie where the only entertainment value was watching him hurt himself. His final leading performance, and they made it about watching him suffer. What could have been the roles that never happened. Here's what's really heartbreaking. Chris Farley wanted to do some serious acting. He was actively trying to get cast in dramatic roles. There were plans for him to play Fatty Arbuckle in a David Mamet written biopic. He wanted to show that he could do more than just physical comedy. Also, he was originally supposed to voice Shrek. I mean, can you imagine instead of Mike Myers doing that Scottish accent? We could have had Chris Farley bringing heart and vulnerability to an animated ogre who just wanted to be loved.
I like my cockles room temperature, thank you very much.
Hey, if you're not doing this for Cocklewoman, why are you doing it?
Simple. Fartwad gets his princess, I get what I want.
That movie would have been completely different, and you know what? Probably better. There were talks about a third movie with David Spade, but Spade told Chris he'd only do it if Chris could get sober. David Spade, his best friend and comedy partner, basically said, "I love you, but I'm not gonna enable you anymore." Chris was also supposed to do the Cable Guy, but scheduling conflicts forced him to do Black Sheep instead. Jim Carrey got that role and turned it into this dark, twisted comedy about obsession and loneliness. Chris could have done that. He had the range. But instead of letting him grow as an actor, Hollywood kept putting him in movies where the joke was, look at the fat guy hurt himself. They had one of the most naturally gifted physical comedians in history, a guy who can make you laugh and break your heart in the same scene, and they just wasted him. Dirty Work, the real final performance. While everyone talks about Almost Heroes as Chris's final movie, that's not technically true. His actual last performance was a small, uncredited cameo in Dirty Work directed by Bob Saget and starring Norm Macdonald. It was just a tiny part, basically a throwaway gag, but somehow it feels more honest than anything else he did in his final years. No pressure to carry an entire movie, no studio executives demanding he fall down more stairs, just Chris being funny with his friends. The movie made $10 million on a $13 million budget, so it was a complete flop, but you know what? At least it was Chris doing what he wanted to do instead of what some suit thought would sell tickets. The cameo was filmed in 1997, probably sometime in the fall just before he died, so Chris's actual final performance was just him hanging out with Norm Macdonald and Bob Saget, making jokes and being silly.
Looks like there's gonna be a brawl. You playing something good?
Hell yeah! Rolling Stones, street fighting man, G7!
You just hit G8.
If you like pina coladas.
In a weird way, I think that feels right. Not Chris Farley the movie star, not Chris Farley the SNL legend, just Chris being funny with friends. December 18th, 1997, the end. Chris Farley was found dead in his Chicago apartment on December 18th, 1997. He was just 33 years old. The autopsy showed he died from a combination of cocaine and heroin, a speedball, with advanced heart disease as a contributing factor. His funeral was held at Our Lady Queen of Peace Catholic Church in Madison, Wisconsin. Over 500 people showed up: Dan Aykroyd, Adam Sandler, Chris Rock, John Goodman, Lorne Michaels, pretty much everyone who'd ever worked with him. One notable absence, and probably the biggest, is David Spade, his best friend, his comedy partner, partner, the guy he'd made millions of dollars with. David Spade didn't go to the funeral. For years, people thought they'd had some kind of falling out. But the truth was actually sadder. Spade said he just couldn't handle it emotionally. He knew if he went to that funeral, he'd completely fall apart. So he stayed home and grieved alone. I mean, I can't really imagine that. Your best friend dies, and you're so devastated that you can't even go to say goodbye. The Adam Sandler moment. Jump forward to 2019. So Adam Sandler finally returns to host SNL for the first time since he was fired in 1995. And at the very end of the show, instead of just saying goodnight like most hosts usually do, he pulls out a guitar. He then sings this song called the Chris Farley song. We think it's gonna be funny. It's about all the stupid stuff they used to do together, all the sketches they did, all the times Chris would eat too much and pass out. But by the end, everyone in the studio's crying.
But a few months later, the party came to an end. We flew out to Madison to bury our friend.
Because it's not really a funny song. It's a love letter to a dead friend. It's Adam Sandler standing on the same stage where he and Chris used to make people laugh, singing about how much he misses his buddy who ate too much and loved everyone and just wanted to make people happy. The song says more about who Chris Farley really was than any of his movies ever really did. Not Chris Farley, the cautionary tale, just Chris, the guy who loved his friends and wanted everyone to have a good time. How Hollywood failed its funniest star. So here's the thing, Chris Farley didn't die because he was weak or because he couldn't handle fame or because he was just another celebrity drug casualty. Chris Farley died because an entire industry took a genuinely sweet, talented guy and turned him into a performing monkey. They saw a man who would do literally anything to make people laugh. And instead of protecting that gift in typical Hollywood fashion, they exploited it. They saw his willingness to hurt himself for comedy and decided that was really his only value. They saw his struggles with addiction and decided banning him from work was easier than getting him real help. Chris wanted to do dramatic roles. He wanted to show his range. He wanted to be more than just that fat, funny guy. And now Hollywood said, nah, just fall down some more stairs. Even at the end, when it was obvious he was struggling, when he could barely get through a sketch without collapsing, they still put him on television because that's what made money. And the saddest part to me is that Chris Farley was genuinely one of the funniest people who ever lived. Watch his Matt Foley sketches, watch him in Tommy Boy, watch any of his SNL work. The dude had a gift. He could make you laugh until your stomach hurt. And then in the same performance, he could absolutely shatter your heart. But instead of nurturing that talent, instead of helping him grow as an artist and as a person, Hollywood just kept feeding him into the machine until there was absolutely nothing left. Chris Farley didn't fail Hollywood. Hollywood failed Chris Farley. And the worst part is, we all knew it was happening. We could see him getting worse. We could see the light going out of his eyes in those final performances, and we just kept watching because honestly, it was still funny. So yeah, that's the story of Chris Farley's final performance. Not really a performance at all, but a slow motion tragedy that everyone saw coming and absolutely nobody stopped. Chris died alone in his apartment, 33 years old, surrounded by the kind of fame and success that's supposed to make everything better. Except it didn't make anything better, it just made everything worse. The next time you watch Tommy Boy or see an old SNL sketch, remember that Chris Farley wasn't just a fat guy who fell down for laughs. He was a person. He was someone's son, someone's friend, someone who just wanted to make people happy. And maybe, just maybe, we can learn something from how badly we let him down. Thanks for watching. This was a little deeper than most of these videos I usually put out. I didn't mean for it to sound so depressing. I still look back and watch Chris Farley movies with the utmost respect. Whenever I'm feeling down, I put on a Chris Farley movie. If I want to watch a movie with the family and just laugh, I put on a Chris Farley movie. Or I'll show them some old SNL sketches. It's not all bad. The mark this guy left on the industry is indescribable. But it's also tragic and really dark. Thanks for watching. Let me know your favorite Chris Farley movie in the comments. What's your favorite performance of his? What's your favorite SNL sketch? I'd love to hear about it. As always, the opinions in this video are mine and mine alone, but what do I know? I'm but a mere jackass. I'll try to do better next time. Catch you later, friends.
I'm trying to do everything I think you'd be doing. And so far, it's going pretty good. I just want to tell you that I still love you, and I sure miss you a lot.